Now, Andrew, as I was reading Total Eclipse of the Mind, I have to say I fell in love with the dark. And I pulled out of my closet a mindfold that I have I was like, okay, I don't want to just keep reading about this. I want to get into it. In this episode of Insights at the Edge, my guest is Andrew Holecek. Andrew Holecek is, first of all, a friend. He's someone I admire. He's an interdisciplinary scholar practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism and other non-dual wisdom traditions who has a terrific gift at making deep and esoteric teachings accessible and practical, including Tibetan Buddhist teachings on the bardo, the passage between life and death, teachings on sleep and dream yoga, how we can actually do spiritual practice while we're sleeping, and the practice of dark retreat, full immersion in darkness, which is what we're going to be talking about today. He's the author of 10 books, including the new Sounds True book, Total Eclipse of the Mind, Unleashing the Power of Darkness for Creativity, Healing, and Transformation. Andrew, welcome.
Tami, it's such a delight, really. Every time I hang with you, I just so look forward to it. Thank you for the opportunity.
You've been a meditator for 50 years. You completed the traditional Tibetan 3-year retreat, no easy feat. You've explored psychedelics, and yet this is what you write at the beginning of Total Eclipse of the Mind. Nothing compares to my experience of dark retreat. It's easily the most transformative practice I've ever done. Okay, big statement.
Yeah, it's not hyperbole. I'm not exaggerating. The return on investment, the ROI with this practice is ridiculous. You can go in for a couple of days, and a number of people. There's amazing testimonials to this degree, extent online these days. People go in for 2, 3, 4 days, and their lives are irrevocably transformed and altered. And I like very much what NBA superstar Rudy Gobert says around this. After he was in for 4 days, he came out and said quite directly, dark retreat is meditation times 1,000. Yeah, it's the most concentrated, intense way to work with one's mind and one's heart. And this is, in fact, what makes it so transformative, and it's also what makes it so challenging, because when you're in the dark, you can't really get away from yourself. And so every aspect of it is profoundly revelatory. And I'd be happy to go up any direction to
There's a lot to talk about here.
A lot to
But
talk
even
about.
just here at the beginning, someone's like dark retreat. I don't even really know what that is. And then we're
Sure.
going to talk about how to bring it out of the retreat context and into our everyday life. But let's start
Yeah.
the formal practice. What's going on?
Yeah. So formal dark retreat is when you go to a specially prepared cabin or cave that is one.
Specially prepared cave. I wonder,
Right.
wonder where I can find one.
Yeah, there aren't that
Yeah.
many, but there are some, and there's
Okay.
more. There's more popping up. Really, there's more cabins than caves, but the caves are kind of cool. We can talk a little bit about some of the differences between them. But these are rooms that are 100% hermetically sealed. I mean, they're beyond dark. They're as dark can get, and they're also extraordinarily quiet. So these places are secluded environments, and so it's in fact this intense sensory deprivation that makes it so transformative. And that's both in Hindu and tantric Buddhist approaches. They talk. You may have heard this term. They talk about pratyahara, sense withdrawal, which is a really critical, important point in a kind of doctrinal framework for this practice, is where all the senses are withdrawn. They're retreated, And in a very real way, they're re-educated. So this is a profound way to quite literally, not metaphorically, learn how to see, sense your world in entirely new ways. And so when you're in the retreat, somebody comes and checks in with you once or twice a day, depending on where you are. I have to say, when I did my retreats, I did not have this type of support. I started this almost 30 years ago, and because there was hardly anything out there at the time where I went, I had zero support. And so I learned a lot of OJT on the job training with this, made a lot of, I wouldn't say mistakes, because nothing was a mistake in the sense that it taught me a great deal. But yeah, you're just basically, you have this incredibly precious, rare opportunity. It's like a silent retreat on steroids where, there's this wonderful line, I really like it. Silence is for bumping into yourself. I like that. Well, dark retreat is for slamming into yourself. And this is one reason in the tradition, Tibetan Buddhist tradition, which is where I have most of my training, Bardo yoga, you mentioned that term, dark retreat is for slamming into yourself. It's considered a wrathful, semi-wrathful form of liberation. Because just like death itself, the darkness is uncompromising, non-negotiable, and eventually it invites you, almost forces you to open and surrender. And right there, Tami, that's where the magic comes from. Just the invitation, the demand actually to just completely open, relax, and assume kind of a shavasana. You go into the dark. I don't want to be too dramatic, but you go into the dark to die. Where letting go is just a euphemism for dying, for death. And so you're just forced to let go in the dark retreat of all your habit patterns, the way you eat, the way you go to the bathroom, the way you brush your teeth. Some of it can be actually quite hysterical as you're in there learning new ways to just negotiate in this unique environment. But that environment provides a very powerful kind of metaphysical mirror that allows you to see and, most importantly, feel. It's a highly embodied practice to see, feel yourself at levels you've never seen and felt before. And this is what makes it so ironically, fantastically revelatory. So more to say, but I think for starters, that's enough.
Can you help me understand the mechanism that is creating all of these changes? You're in darkness, yes, it's the sensory deprivation of any form of light or seeing. You're seeing darkness and seeing whatever you see in darkness. But how does this create all of this change?
Yeah, you're going right to the heart of it. This is so great. So yeah, in geek speak, this is called the phenomenology, like what is really taking place, like you said. And this is actually what we're studying. I'm working now with a number of institutions, actually 5 universities and research labs. We're really studying this stuff because there's some data, parenthetically, on sensory deprivation in flotation tanks, but there's virtually nothing on extended dark retreat like this. And so what we're discovering is that when you go into the dark, what happens here that's really quite beautiful, and the Tibetans have a very interesting word for this. The word is Rang Bop, R-A-N-G-B-O-P, which basically means self-fall. And so what happens over extended periods, and this may not happen in your first retreat, but for some people it does. It tends to happen over some durations, and I can explain why. What happens is the mind opens and relaxes to such an extent. It's like our Trungpa Rinpoche very famously said, well, actually, no, I'll get back to that in a second. My favorite definition of meditation, this is where this ties in, is meditation is habituation to openness. And so what happens in the dark is you pass this threshold initially. Very often when people go in, they contract defensively against the dark. But eventually, if they in fact do open and relax, the mind descends into itself. And as it falls into itself, Tami, this is where it just becomes spectacular. It's like a tour, an archaeological tour of the sedimentation levels of your conscious and unconscious mind. And so what I mean by this is you open and relax. And again, by the way, meditation will do this, right? Deep inner work will do this. Any deep, intensive inner work will do this. In a microcosmic way, this happens every night when we fall asleep. We enter a mini dark retreat every night when we fall asleep. And the big dark retreat is waiting for us at the end of this life. But as the mind opens and relaxes, it descends from conscious to preconscious to subconscious to unconscious to collective unconscious. This is where the work of Carl Jung and the depth psychologists really come into play. And then the baton, so to speak, is handed off into this the non-dual wisdom traditions, the deepest dimensions of the super unconscious mind, things like the clear light mind. And so as one is doing this, what's just so spectacular is as the mind falls into itself, you start to realize all the ways that we constantly distract, pull apart. The word literally means to pull apart. And when you're in the dark, you can't distract anymore. There's nothing to distract into. So what happens is the mind retracts, the mind retreats, it returns, fundamentally opening, relaxing, and falling into what we're calling in our studies the reduction base of innate wholeness. And so what happens here in the pause is instead of fracture upon fracture upon fracture, dismemberment, 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 distraction, distraction upon distraction, what happens is you have remembrance, reintegration. So every time you go down and drop, instead of dismembering, you're remembering. I mean, the essence of spiritual practice is remembrance. Plato was onto this, the process of anamnesis, of recollection. And so the image I use, and then I'll pause because I think this is a good one. So imagine you're skiing. I'm a skier. So imagine I go skiing and I break my leg. So I have two broken pieces. So I go see my orthopedic surgeon. He puts these two broken pieces into approximation, puts them next to each other, and then he puts them in a holding cast. And then what happens through the mere act, Tami, this is where it's so brilliant, through the mere act of cessation, through the mere act of holding, all the natural restorative healing processes, in this case of your body, take place in exactly analogous fashion by putting your entire being in this kind of holding environment, this cast. That really, when you can no longer dismember, you start to remember. That's where the healing, the integration, the transformation takes place. So through this descent, you're returning to this magnificent restorative dimension of your being. And there you start to see very practically, we can come back to this towards the end, like, okay, this is like super cool, but pretty esoteric. Like, why should I do this in the world today? Well, I think you can make a very powerful argument that what we see today as the meta crisis, the poly crisis, is the result of one fracture upon the next. It's just one dismemberment upon the next. And so you can actually see in a very powerful first-person way how we're just really pretty broken beings. And we're broken by this relentless distraction. Light just continuously seduces us out of ourselves and we distract. So in the dark, fundamentally, this is what we're studying. This is the principal kind of generation of the transformation, the creativity, the healing.
What in the dark do I need to do or not do in order to actually avail myself of this? I mean, I was thinking about, well, someone could go into a, dark cabin for 3 days and just thrash on the floor.
Totally.
That's not going to be particularly useful, is it? Like, I have to connect or relate to this in some way.
Yeah, yes? Spot on. So people can do dark retreats for many, many different reasons. I went in principally just at sidebar decades ago to fundamentally, literally prepare for death in the context of Bardo yoga. I literally went in there to learn how to die, to let go and to open.
When you say literally, were you dealing with?
I shouldn't say literally. No,
you were exploring it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a
good
point of clarification because we don't want to scare people more than necessary. So yeah,
more than you already are.
Right, exactly. So you can go in for you can incubate creativity. You can go in searching for meaning and purpose. You can go in for divination. I mean, there's a vast variety of things you can do in the dark. But for me, Tami, by far the most important thing to do, and you suggested this, is absolutely nothing, which is simultaneously the easiest thing in the world and the hardest thing. Because we're not human beings, we're human doings. And when you're in the dark, you can't do anything. And so I love what Meister Eckhart says here when he says the soul does not grow by addition, but by subtraction. So this is a process and a practice of negation, cessation, erasure. And when you think about even all the terms for awakening, many of them are actually terms of negation, cessation. We have nirvana, extinction, nirodha, cessation, nirguna, nirvikalpa, nisprapancha. I mean, all these terms, non-duality, these are terms of cessation, negation, erasing. And so I find that the single best thing to do is literally nothing. But the trick, of course, is doing it well. That's really the art of meditation. Because if you're in there and you're thrashing and you're resisting and you're fighting, yeah, you'll get across the finish line of a dark retreat, but you'll just come out battered and bruised, and your ego structure is just going to be stronger. So the most important thing to do is develop a quality of trust. This is really big when you go into the dark. What does darkness really represent? Because fundamentally, this is super important, Tami. The darkness is neutral. It's just like a mirror. The darkness really isn't doing anything. It's just providing this extraordinarily precious environment where we can look and feel into ourselves at levels never done before. So the best thing to do is shavasana, corpse pose. Just lie on the floor and just do nothing. That's not easy because, again, we're human beings and I'm on human doings and not human beings. And so with that said, there are supplemental things to kind of like fill in the space when you're not just lying on the ground and doing nothing. A lot of people at first, and it's not a problem at all, they sleep like crazy for a couple of days. You don't realize how sleep deprived you are when you're in the dark. This is not at all a waste of time. First of all, it's profoundly restorative, regenerative at a physiological level. But even more compellingly, and you alluded to this in your introduction of my work, it's a magnificent opportunity to work with the nocturnal meditations, liminal dreaming, lucid dreaming, dream yoga, and sleep yoga. And the reason this is so spectacular is because it's a kind of a reallocation of our perceptual resources, because we consolidate all our attention, all our resources in the waking state. And it's called wake centricity, sight centricity, all, by the way, in the service of egocentricity. And so when you're in the dark, you decentralize in the best sense of the word. You can reallocate your sensory faculties. In fact, in geek speak, this is what we're studying. It's actually called cross-modal plasticity. And what this means is that this is so interesting. 1/3 of brain volume and 2/3 of brain processing power is devoted to vision, the most superficial of all sense faculties. The sense faculty that seduces us out into the world of mere appearance, where we're skimming and scrolling and speeding and skipping across the surface of life. Well, when that most dominant sense faculty is completely taken offline, even at a neurological level, you can reallocate all those perceptual resources. And then what happens is you come to your senses by losing your senses. There's so many wonderful ironies that take place in the dark. You become much more sensitive to your interiority. It's called introception. You're much more sensitive to what you feel. Everything comes alive when all your kind of cognitive perceptual resources are no longer consolidated to this external superficial most sense faculty. So I'm riffing a lot on this because this is a big deal. This is a part of this remedial work. This is what the Hindu Buddhist tradition talks about as pratyahara, right? Sense withdrawal. Retreating and withdrawing, like they say, like a tortoise, into the interiority of our being, so that we can then connect more deeply to what we feel. And in the non-dual Shaiva Tantra tradition, Kashmir Shaivism, they talk so beautifully about touch as a form of transmission. Touch is a form of knowledge. And I'm always thinking here of like the Sistine Chapel, where God is reaching down and touching, I guess it's Adam. And so what happens in the dark that's so magnificent is you're returning, as you drop in, you're returning from the most dualistic sense, sight. Sound is also taken away. I mean, yes, you can smell when food comes, you can taste when food comes, but fundamentally you're almost forced into the most intimate of all sense faculties, which is taction, which is touch. And so the literal, the metaphorical, this is one of the dualities that breaks down. You literally get deeper in touch with yourself. You get deeper in touch with reality when you're no longer distracting, pulling apart into all these surface modalities. So long-winded answer to a really terrific question.
Now, Andrew, as I was reading Total Eclipse of the Mind, I have to say I fell in love with the dark as you were writing and describing about it. You got me. You romanced me into it. And I pulled out of my closet a mindfold that I have and I thought as we were talking,
Beautiful.
wouldn't it be fun if we just explored together, you and I, continuing our conversation, but being in darkness while we do? because I was like, okay, I don't want to just keep reading about this. I want to get into it. And also to share with you, I signed up for a dark retreat. I found a
Oh,
little tiny house just a couple hours from where I am. And I was like, I have to go do this
there you go.
and actually follow my love. So here's the question
Yeah.
that came up for me. My intention in going to such a dark retreat is to reset my nervous
There you go.
system.
There you go.
I have felt that my nervous system, ever since the pandemic, I got to be honest with you, has been in a kind of overdrive state. I've been working with it, and I'm wondering what you have to say about how darkness can help with this.
Oh my gosh, 100%. Yeah. Yeah, isn't it true? For me, it's just with COVID, with everything that's happening in this meta crisis, the political, I mean, pick your poison, right? I really do feel not only drawn and quartered, I feel splintered. I feel decentered. I feel fragmented. And so you just absolutely nailed it when you go into the dark. And by the way, let me just say what we're doing here is spectacular. I'm so glad you're introducing even what we're doing here, because what happens, let me just say something about this. When I either
Sure.
close my
We're
eyes,
in the dark now, Andrew. I mean,
exactly,
we're feeling our way with each other.
exactly. I mean, this is one of the most beautiful things about what darkness represents as a principle. This is so interesting. And this applies to your kind of nervous system reset, by the way, is that you can create light. You cannot create darkness. Darkness is elemental. It's primordial. You cannot manufacture it. You cannot produce it. And so this is really, really interesting, because I think when people reflect on darkness, they are simultaneously attracted and repulsed by it. At least a lot of people are. And exploring this kind of bipolar relationship is very interesting. I think people are attracted to it because they intuitively know deep in their system that it does represent the elemental, the primordial. For me, and I feel this the minute I put this mask on or I close my eyes, darkness invites intimacy. It invites interiority. It represents depth, authenticity, and dare I even say truth. And so, what a wonderful exercise just to do this, to connect, to slow down, because darkness really invites and almost forces this slowing down and then cessation, and then connecting and speaking from these depths. Because I feel personally, when I don't do that, again, I get speedy, I kind of rush to the surface of my identity structure. I get superficial in the way I approach. So for me, putting this mask on, speaking from this space, going into the dark retreat, which does this obviously in a more extended fashion, the returning to this elemental, this primordial, yes, this hits the reset button, both physiologically, because one does tend to sleep so much more in the dark at first, which is just fantastic healing capacity of the dark. And then eventually, like I mentioned earlier, then the deeper restorative processes of this descent, waking down into the wisdom of the body, waking down into this depth and interiority. And sometimes people don't realize, this is worth a brief comment, that once you get past, just a few millimeters on the surface of your skin, it's pitch black inside your body. And so this return to the depth of the center of ourselves, this is where, darkness represents genesis, creativity, and origin. In so many world's mythological traditions, it's darkness that precedes light. Before the Big Bang, allegedly, there was this primordial soup of darkness. We were probably conceived in the dark and spend 9 months bathed in it. We return to darkness every night when we fall asleep. We return to darkness at the end of life. And in fact, we use languaging that suggests the kind of the sense, the irreducibility of darkness when we say things like, at the end of the day, which represents for what? For us, what? A quality of what really matters, what really counts. What's the bottom line at the end of the day?
Mhm.
Well, what
Mhm.
happens at the end of the day? It gets dark. It gets dark.
And one
So,
of the things that attracted me so much, part of my falling in love is what you're saying, the irreducibility. I think I've had certain cautionary notes for myself around exploring psychedelics. But when it comes to darkness, I notice I feel there's no obstacle because I'm not putting something in, I'm simply being with something that's organically there. I wonder if you have a comment about that.
Spot on. This is exactly why a number of the scientists that I'm working with that do parallel research in psychedelics are beyond over the moon studying this because, yeah, this is such a great comment, Tami, because at the early levels of dark retreat, and this is what I make two distinctions here about darkness. This is my languaging, but I think it's completely appropriate. Kind of sutra level dark retreat, which is more exoteric, it's more about self-fulfillment, and it's more psycholytic in nature. Psycholytic, lysis means to loosen, to soften. And so this is where, at the sutra level, it's the psycholytic aspect. This is where all the stuff loosens, comes up. Things are broken up and have to come, not have to come, but do come up to the surface. And along these lines, again, Trungpa Rinpoche, the master of the one-liner, he said so beautifully along these lines, meditation isn't a sedative, it's a laxative. Well, if we repeat a little bit, Rudy Gobert meditation, dark retreat is meditation times 1,000, you're in the dark, well, you're laxating times 1,000. And basically what that means is you're opening, and stuff is going to come up. I mentioned earlier the descent of the mind, you're submerging. Well, you can equally talk about dark retreat as a practice of emerging. Doesn't really matter which metaphor you're using. One way or the other, you're going to go down into it or it's going to come up. You're going to purge, you're going to cleanse, it's going to come up. That's the psycholytic aspect. Now, Tantra, this is where it really gets cool. This is where it's now a little bit more esoteric. This is where it's not so much about self-fulfillment, but more about self-transcendence, more spiritual than psychological. And in fact, it's more psychedelic instead of psycholytic in the truest sense of that word, because psychedelic literally means mind manifesting. And in the dark, mind manifests as never before. Mind becomes reality, just like when we fall asleep. And according to the wisdom traditions, just like when we die. Why? Well, because there's nothing else. It's all been taken away. And so there's no doubt, you nailed this right on the head, Tami, is that dark retreat is absolutely positively a sober psychedelic. You become the medicine. And we're going to be studying this. We have no doubt whatsoever. We don't have the data yet, but we're going to gather it, that after a certain amount of time in the dark, there's no doubt whatsoever that things like endogenous DMT are going to be released. This is what accounts for the more dazzling aspects of extended darkness, the lights, the visions, and all that kind of stuff that happens. But the most important thing here, and then I'll pause, is that a very powerful kind of analog here is that a big issue with dark, just like with psychedelic, is set and setting, having the right place to go where you feel safe, you're contained. That's the setting. Mindset is how you approach it. Another really big issue with both darkness and psychedelics is dosage. The issue with dark retreat is you can overdose. You absolutely positively can overdose on yourself. And so getting the dosage right is part of why having a guide on hand is really helpful. Understanding what's happening when you're in the dark, like where do the pressures come from? This is a really rich topic that we could talk about. Why does it get heavy and suffocating and oppressive? There's a reason for this. And so this notion of dosage is a good one. Titrating the dose, figuring it out exactly what is going to be workable for you. Because if you go in there too long, and this is a big problem with people that want to white knuckle it and stay in for weeks, or even the 49-day thing, this is where you can get into trouble because you can in fact overdose on yourself. So the most
Well, and
important,
the wonderful thing here, Andrew, because I'm just going to take off my mask for a moment and
yeah,
then I'm going to put it back on. But look how perfect control of the dosage there is. Hey, hi, friend. I feel like seeing you for a moment. But wait a second. I'm
exactly.
going to go back. Isn't that awesome?
Well, Tami, as usual, you're the visionary because what you just,
I'm a visionary with a dark mask on.
isn't it true that the irony of language, the paradox, even the breakdown of literal and metaphorical comes into play here. Because what you just did here is what we're exploring, me meaning some scholars and scientists as well, the practice of gray retreat, which is tight. It's exactly what we just did. Titrating, dripping the darkness so that it never can become a problem, so that you can absolutely positively work out the dosage levels by simply flipping the light on and off, or just like we did, taking the mask on and off. And therefore, people who hear about this, the first response is, there's just no effing way I can do this. There's just no way. Well, if you approach it through this titrated way, closing your eyes, again, using the psychedelic language, you can microdose in the blink of an eye. You can microdose every time you put the mask on. And so everybody who has eyelids can do dark retreat. And so this is the way you work your way into it. This is the way this otherwise wildly esoteric practice is just for the professionals can become applicable and brought to home use and brought to scale. And this, to me, Tami, is what's incredibly exciting, because I see, boy, we can talk about this. You know, the principal signature of this dark age, we live in the Kali Yuga. You may have noticed, another term traditionally for the meta crisis. Well, we can make a very powerful case that one of the principal I should say, generative drivers of the dark age is light and artificial light. And then deeper, maybe towards the end of our conversation, I want to plant the seed.
Well, say a little bit. I think people may be like, what? I mean, there's so many issues that are causing our problems. Artificial light, really?
Yeah. So now we're going to the reduction base. So again, just hang with me and see if it's true for you. And what I'm trying to get at here is that, again, there's nothing, of course, but good Lord, we couldn't operate in the world without light. I mean, blind people will contest that, but we need light. If we didn't have photosynthesis, we couldn't eat. And light, of course, is an extraordinarily powerful ingredient of the human condition. I mean, half the day is light and half the day is dark. So I'm not basically saying let's get rid of the light. What I'm saying is let's put it into balance. And so let me interject one thing here that I learned from the Greek tradition, if I might, that I found extraordinarily helpful. They have this beautiful term. This will help you understand the basic principle of what happens in the dark in a larger wisdom tradition context. You'll find this also in the teachings of Taoism on yin and yang. But within the context of our own wisdom tradition, in other words, the Greeks principally, they speak about, this comes from Heraclitus. He was a philosopher of flow. He's the guy that said you can't step into the same river twice. Well, he also taught a lot about non-duality, believe it or not. And he brought forth this incredibly interesting term. It's a beautiful term that I'll explain. It has such intuitive resonance. It's called enantiodromia, Enantiodromia. The word literally means running into the opposite. And when you really explore this principle, which I did, it just blew my socks off as a tremendous explanatory framework for what happens in the dark. And basically, the idea here, this also represented in the East with the yin yang, is that if you take something to its extreme, it flips into its opposite. And so this is the logic here that, God, I wish somebody would have told me this 30 years ago in the dark. When you're in the dark, after a while, the past closes in on you. The future closes in on you. It feels like the walls are closing in on you. It feels like the ceiling and the floor are closing in on you. And you feel like, on one level, being slightly dramatic, it feels like you're just being crushed into this tomb. And what I've discovered that's just bloody amazing within this context of enantiodromia is that when the mind is forced into the present moment to such an extent that darkness invites, well, guess what happens? It flips into unbelievable openness. This is the most amazing thing. And I mentioned this in my recent TED Talk on this topic. The tomb, you're in the dark, it can be really intense at first. It can be really heavy. And we can talk about this in terms of the preliminary descent of the mind when it falls into itself. It falls into and through all these upper bandwidths of the unconscious mind. That's where all the spiders and snakes hang out, the refuse of the unconscious mind. And that's why the first part of dark retreat can be somewhat challenging, because you're facing that. All that stuff is coming up. But once you drop into and past and below that, what felt like a tomb, I can't resist the language to play, turns into a womb. Or as I say, a womb with no view, or in this case, a womb with the best view of who you really are. So I'll pause, but this is a big deal. So the darkness closes in on you, you're withdrawing, you're withdrawing, you're withdrawing, you're withdrawing to such an extent that eventually it blows you wide open. And this is huge, Tami, because when you come out, you actually have no idea until you come out of the retreat just how open you got while you were in the retreat and how basically contracted we are as we live our lives. We're so contracted. And so when you're in the dark, you're relaxing, you're opening, everything dilates. You know, it's not just your eyes that dilate in the dark, your mind dilates, your heart dilates, your body dilates. And I wouldn't do it, but it'd be an interesting experience. If I'm in the dark for X amount of days, 4, 5, 6 days, theoretically as a thought experiment, if the walls were to blow off and the ceiling was to blow off, and I was to be hit in the full broad light of the day, I would probably go into sensory shock. And what this reveals to me is just how calloused I've become, just how disconnected I've become, just how out of touch I've become with myself, with others, and with this world. This is the loss of empathy and compassion and connectivity to self and other. And I see this when I come out. It takes me, depending on how long I'm in, it takes me days sometimes to come out. Because every time I drip the light in, just like I drip the dark going in, I drip the light coming out. And every time that light comes on, Tami, I will notice very, very sensitively an interoceptive, some level of contraction, some level of defensiveness, some level of just pulling apart. And so this to me is profoundly revelatory of just how contracted I've become in this life through relentless sensory assault, through all these weapons of mass distraction, all these light sources, and hence coming back to this light thing, that if you go into the dark, I'm coming back to wind it back up with the enantiodromia thing, close down, you're going to eventually open up. And then not only do you open it up to this extent, but you finally discover, as my friend Chris Wallace says so beautifully, there is no darkness within. There's just light unseen. And so you go into the dark so deeply, it flips into these profound lights. So I'll stop there because I know I'm throwing
Okay.
so many
Yeah.
noodles on the wall, but this is
That's
just
all right.
so rich.
I want to pick up on something that I think is really important and that you write about very beautifully in Total Eclipse of the Mind, which is working through the layers of spiders and snakes as you
Yeah.
just described them in our conversation. Because what I've been finding as I talk to people is they say, gosh, I just keep waking up at 3 a.m. in some kind of panic. How do I work with it? And I thought, dark retreat could really teach us how to work with our panic moments, our terror moments,
Oh my
those
gosh.
that come upon us. And in dark retreat, we have to find our way through. And you go through a 4-part process that I think is
Yeah.
really brilliant. You teach it in a version in your reverse meditation book with Sounds True. But I think talking about it in the context, I'm in the dark and something unwanted as part of this laxative
Right.
experience is meeting me right in the face. What do I do? Take me
Yeah.
through it, Andrew.
Yeah. Oh, this is so great, Tammy. So let's actually do this together. Let me do that
Yes.
before I go through, and I can absolutely positively mention the 4 steps of this, but even to make it more applicable and appropriate, let me just guide you through this. This is a really quite beautiful thing that I do. I'm not exaggerating, Tammy. Every single day. I kind of learned it
Something
spontaneously.
unwanted happens every day? Really?
Yeah, exactly. Kind of amazing, right? So let's do this together. So if you don't have a mask, and many of you probably don't, you know what? Just close your eyes. So let's just do this together. Simply close your eyes. Take a nice deep breath. Put your hand over your heart and allow yourself to feel. You mentioned the term working through it, going through it. I'm going to amend this ever so slightly with the languaging, go into it. Exactly what the darkness invites. So we're going to do a mini dark retreat right here. Whatever you're feeling right now, the invitation is to feel it, make contact with it, touch it as fully as you possibly can. If you're like me, this probably invites a wonderful interiority. The practice is, and this applies again to anything that can happen at any point. If you're having panic in the middle of the night, any unwanted experience during the day, it doesn't matter. Feel into it, but don't feed it. Feel it, but don't feed it. You know you're feeding it when you start riffing on it. That's what keeps you up at night. That's what creates a real panic attack. You're feeding this underlying sensation that in many instances may not feel all that great. Well, you may discover that if you give yourself permission to feel it as fully as you possibly can, this radically changes the entire structure of the experience. Again, Trungpa Rinpoche, the master of the one-liner, said so beautifully, there is no way out. The magic is to discover that there is a way in. Dark retreat is the way in. This practice is the way in. Hold to your experience, just like the holding environment I mentioned earlier in the dark. Notice how we break away. This is the most immediate iteration of this distracting, pulling apart tendency that we have. When things especially are difficult and challenging, our default is to distract, pull apart, break away. Right there in that gesture of distraction, we transform simple unwanted experience / pain into complex suffering. So you can deconstruct your suffering by remembering, returning, retracting to the fundamental unwanted sensation. Hold to that. Don't grasp, but just simply hold it in the cradle of loving kindness. Do so without judgment. Swami Kripalu said the highest form of spiritual practice is self-observation without judgment. Just simply feel it. Playing with language yet again, this is how you can resolve even the deepest underlying traumas, because trauma is nothing more than chronic contraction. And when those contractions come up and you hold them, essence of the word dharma, D-H-A-R-M-A in Sanskrit, big word in Buddhism and Hinduism, the word literally means to hold. As in stop, cease, don't move away, hold in that sense. And then hold as in contain, relate. So eventually you'll discover, hold it to heal it. This is how you resolve any unwanted experience. even intractable chronic contractions of trauma. And all this is the kind of thing that comes up in the dark, whether it's the darkness of the night and a panic attack in the middle of the night, the darkness of dark retreat. When you're no longer distracting, you're starting to have the opportunity to get in touch with a whole host of unwanted experiences. And if we keep running from them, we will never process them. We'll never get through them. Stop. Drop to the wisdom of your body, which knows what to do. So I'll pause there, Tami. I can say more about the 4 specific steps of reverse meditation, but this is the essence of it. This is really the heart of the whole practice, is kind of reversing your normal strategies to run away and to anesthetize by distracting, drop into experience, especially when it's unwanted. This is how we digest, metabolize, process unwanted experiences. This is how we purify karma. This is how we prevent the accretion of karma. And just this incredibly simple gesture. Invited with this exercise, really invited an extended dark retreat, gives you the extraordinary opportunity to process and relate to a ton of challenging, unwanted experiences that have to come up. If they don't come up, your life becomes a symptomatic readout, an avoidance strategy to avoid these unwanted experiences. And dark retreat invites this stuff, allows it to come up.
Just a couple of more questions, Andrew, with the darkness here
Like,
between us. You mentioned that as we move through unwanted experience, the psycholytic, I think is what you said,
yeah,
dimension of this, we move to yet a deeper place in time where we're encountering, I think you said something like who we really are, something to that effect. So from this place of having the darkness be our container for the conversation, our holding space, which I really, really like. Tell me about that discovery
oh, huge.
and
Yeah.
perhaps even bringing forward how you discovered this in dark retreat. Like, was there an initial moment when you were in dark retreat and you were like, oh my effing God,
Yeah.
this is what I've been looking for?
Yeah. 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 Whew. Yeah. So this is great. So this is now what happens exactly like you're suggesting when you start to relax and open. So you've dropped through the upper, what I call the refuse heap of the upper dimensions of the unconscious mind. The refused elements. You drop through the spiders and snakes. Now you're dropping deeper, deeper, and deeper into the deeper dimensions of the unconscious mind. And we can talk a little bit more later about how that term is actually a slight misnomer, but I don't want to sidetrack your very important question. And so as the mind continues to open and relax, like Rumi put it so beautifully, into wider, wider rings of being, now you're getting down into deeper, more fundamental truths. And so this is where I like to use this languaging, the darkness is the color of non-duality. It's a duality decimator. And fundamentally, darkness will take you all the way to the groundless ground of non-duality. That's the fruition of this practice. But as you're working your way down and opening, you're going to go through, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, through these kind of sedimentation levels, an archaeological tour of the unconscious mind. And you're going to drop, I mentioned, into the personal unconscious, then into the collective unconscious. And so whether you want to use the Jungian depth psychological terms or of the archetypes, which is completely appropriate here, or, Tami, I prefer the Eastern and Western renderings of the gods and the deities. This is where you meet the gods and the deities. These are the most fundamental dimensions before you dissolve into the full complete openness of the non-dual space. This is where it becomes a complete game changer and deal maker, because now if you're returning to the dimensions of your mind that are generative of everything we do up on the surface, these fundamental archetypes, these fundamental principles of the deities and the gods and what they represent, the principles and qualities that they represent. And so when you're in the dark, you drop into this incredible creative matrix. So hence, dark retreat is such a tremendous source of creativity. And here's the aha moment. You asked for one aha moment. I dedicated this book that's coming out to the deity Prajnaparamita, which is the feminine archetype of emptiness. We can talk a little bit about that. And also, I dedicated the book to Hermes Mercurius, the Greco-Roman gods that are basically those archetypes, those deities, those gods that ferry between the gods and the mortals, that carry information, that carry insight. And so what happened to me, especially in the dark retreat that broke loose this book that's coming out, I say it's my best book because I didn't write it. Hermes Mercurius wrote this book. And so when one opens to such an extent, these primordial creative forces start to flow through you. And this is why more and more creative types, Elizabeth Gilbert, poets and writers and musicians, more and more are going in to the dark because they're realizing they have this extraordinary capacity to tap in to these tremendously creative sources. So when you return to the original, to the reduction base, no surprise that originality and creativity would be part of this return. So this is a really wonderful, deeper exploration that, again, for some people can happen rather quickly. For others, might take a little bit of time in the dark. But the mind drops into this magnificent, creative, generative matrix, this kind of matriarchal dimension of the mind, from which everything is born, everything is brought forth. And so it's not merely, and you mentioned this, and then again, I'll pause, I get so excited. You mentioned something about space and time. Well, the other thing that happens when the mind opens and falls to this extent, even a little bit below this level, is what happens in this kind of duality decimating journey is not only does day and night break down, not only does waking and dreaming break down, not only does inside and outside break down, but eventually the very sense of self and other breaks down, because these are all constructs. They're all made up. And when you go into the dark, they're unmade, they're deconstructed. So as you're falling down, you realize this is beyond profound. But anybody who's had a really deep non-dual experience will tell you this. Anybody who's had a really deep psychedelic experience will tell you this. You drop into and then below the very dimension of space, time, and causality, because these are all co-emergent. They arise with the sense of self. So when you drop below this dimension, even space breaks down, time breaks down, causality breaks down. You start to have visions of the future. When I wrote this book, I had a very clear vision of precisely what was going to happen with the release of this book. That was another consequence of this. This is where the shamans enter into, the world of the mystics. You can cultivate this in the dark. And so the self dissolves, space-time causality dissolves. Whoa, now you're getting into these real deep transpersonal, trans-spatial temporal dimensions that fundamentally change everything. Now you're returning to the reduction base that generates all of manifest reality. And so the capacity for darkness to do this, and again, deep meditation will do this, right? Nocturnal meditations will do this, death will do this. But the darkness is probably, not probably, for me, without question, the single best way to drop all the way down into this reduction base. So does that make sense, Tami? Does that resonate with you?
It does. And with that, Andrew, I think I'm going to take off the eye mask because it's
Do it slowly.
time for me to integrate a bit here after that.
Do it slowly.
That's right. Okay, I am. Yeah. Whoa.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what do you know right now? Wait, what do you notice right
Even
now?
before,
What do you feel? What do you feel? What do you feel?
I feel an explosion, a boundless explosion of light that feels extremely vibrant, stimulating, and I feel a lot of love and gratitude too.
Let me say something about that, my dear. Oh my God, you just hit it. So this is great. This is one of the most beautiful aspects of this practice, is that as the mind opens and opens and opens and opens, it softens. It's like I mentioned, your eyes dilate, your mind dilates, your heart dilates, your body dilates. And what is a natural consequence of this opening? Love. Love. This is how you fall in love with your world. When you're no longer contracting against it, you surrender and open to it. A natural consequence of this opening is love. And so I mentioned this, it's somewhat embarrassing, but not really, because it's kind of cute. Excuse me, when I come out of the dark, I sometimes feel like I should be quarantined because my heart is so open. And I'm not actually kidding. I will be with people that I don't even know all that well, and I just can't help myself. I will just simply tell them, I love you. I've done it. And it kind of freaks them out. And so I literally cannot help expressing this level of openness. And so to me, this right here is worth the price of admission. You open, 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 look below. Don't take my word for this. Look below any experience of unconditional love, not lust, not conditional love, but love for a pet, love for a parent, unconditional love. Look deeply into any experience of unconditional love. What are you going to find? You're going to find openness. I guarantee it. And so you can practice love by practicing openness. And when you go into the dark, even though initially when you hit the dark, you might contract defensively because it's like a cold plunge. But once you warm up to it, so to speak, and you relax and you open, your heart breaks open. And it's just like you said, the world is vibrant, it's softer, it's more awake. You notice this in what? 20 minutes of wearing your mask. Imagine doing this for an afternoon. Imagine doing this for a couple of days. This is like, Mingyur Rinpoche in his beautiful book, Falling in Love with the World.
Well, and what is so interesting, and I'm so happy we demonstrated it with the mask, is you can do this right in the midst of your life. I know you, Andrew, in your basement, you have built a dark room where you can, within your house, you could go for several hours.
Every day.
And what I like about the mask is your eyes are open
That's right.
in the dark versus just doing a practice of shutting your eyes. There's something, I don't know if you can speak to that, what's
Yeah.
happening in our neurological system, but when our eyes are open in the dark, it's a little different than when you just shut your eyes.
Once again, such a sensitive statement. And this we've explored this with some dark retreat centers and some dark retreat guides. This is super interesting, Tami. We've discovered that about 90%, we don't have a hard data yet, but we're collecting it. About 90% of people that go into the dark usually contract at first. They have a flight, fight, freeze response because it's so unfamiliar, it's so unknown, they defensively contract. What a lot of people do, and I bet it's these 90%, we're trying to collect the data on this. Most of the people, when they first go into the dark, they keep their eyes closed all the time. Why? Because it normalizes the darkness, right? It normalizes it. But when you're in the dark, and this is why the masks that you can open your eyes underneath are so important, you open your eyes underneath the dark, it's a different story. Now you're relating to this restructuring of your sensory capacities that you're literally boycotting your sense faculty. You're literally working, again, geek speak, this cross-modal plasticity. You're inviting all this data that normally is poured into the occipital cortex to process visual information. All that information, all that processing power now, I should say, is now available for your other senses to come online, especially the sense of touch, empathy, taction, the ability to relate to your world in a fully more bodied, sensual way. And so, yeah, that's spot on. Practicing with your eyes open underneath the mask is helpful. Stepping into a dark space. You mentioned constructed my dark room. Let me just say something very briefly. That construction project took all about 5 minutes because you don't have to invest a lot in decor, right? This is a really important aspect of the dark. You cannot have a bad hair day in the dark. Appearances don't matter. Let me say this about 20 times. When you're in the dark, appearances don't matter. This is the ultimate democratizing agent. It doesn't matter if you have the wealth of Bezos or Musk, or you're a dictator or a king or a pauper or a beggar, or you're overweight. And this is why, Tami, this is so beautiful. So many women come out. This is so touching. So many women in particular come out of the dark with tears in their eyes, saying, I never felt so safe and so held and so loved in my life. I could finally drop my guard and just be myself, because I realized nobody was looking at me. Men weren't checking me out. I wasn't being sized up by anybody. I could finally relax and just be myself. Think about what this could do for people that have body dysmorphias, or they're struggling with aging. And they're again, what are they doing? Those people that suffer, they're consolidating their identity structure at the superficial most dimension of their being, which is their physicality, their appearance. That doesn't matter when you're in the dark. The only thing that matters in the dark is the only thing you ever really have, and that's your beautiful mind and your good heart. And so it's the ultimate eraser. It's the ultimate kind of democratization process in this regard. And so this is no small thing. The appearances don't matter. People come out feeling, wow, I never felt so safe and held because I wasn't being judged anymore. It's beautiful.
And as we're completing our debrief, if you will, with our masks off, you talked about the holding space
Yeah.
and the word dharma and its connection to holding. And I never knew that, Andrew, before this conversation. And this is really interesting to me, because what I brought forward was, how do we work through traumatic experience? And I know in my experience, in working through traumatic experience, it has a lot to do with finding that holding space and relaxing into it.
Yep.
And the fact that the darkness becomes a holding space. I wonder if you can just comment on that, and we'll end our conversation.
It just sends chills up my back. These questions are so fantastic. Yeah, the darkness it's incredibly nurturing. I'm riffing these days, and you had a wonderful guest. I apologize, I can't remember her name. A couple of weeks ago, when you talked about rematriation, this is a magnificent aspect of dark retreat, is working to rematriate, to return to the feminine. In the wisdom traditions, light is masculine, darkness is feminine. Too much light, it results fundamentally in all the pathologies we see of patriarchy, all the dominance of consciousness itself. The unconscious mind is feminine. Darkness is feminine. And so again, using the principles of enantiodrome, and then I'll come very specifically back to your question, we're balancing, I would say getting rid, that's not the right way. We're balancing this runaway patriarchal expression, getting lost and blinded by the light. At these levels, light doesn't reveal, light conceals. So when you go into the dark, you're returning to the divine feminine. Emptiness is feminine, darkness is feminine. You're rematriating, you're returning. This is why dark retreat centers that are actually caves that are in the earth are really magnificent. You're balancing this fundamental equation. And so when you go into the darkness holds you eventually. Again, it can crush you at first, but that crushing weight, by the way, is not coming from the darkness. It's coming from all your projections. All the weight that you feel in the dark is directly proportional to everything you've projected onto the dark. And so when you're in there and you're feeling all this stuff, that's the weight. All your projections have been loaded onto the dark. When you're in the dark, eventually it gets lighter. It frees up, it lightens up. This is one way you know you're progressing, because you're starting to own up. You're starting to clean up your projections, because literally and metaphorically, you can't project in the dark your normal way. You can't throw shit around in the dark like you do in the day. It'll come back and hit you. So you're forced to integrate your projections. Now, as you do that, the darkness changes. It doesn't change, you've changed. And now you can then trust and surrender the basic holding environment, the goodness of this darkness. And as you do so, the darkness provides this incredible embryonic environment, profound mother. Prajnaparamita, I dedicated the book, mother of all the Buddhas. She holds you in the dark. This wisdom holds you in the dark. And when you're held in this loving way, and it is made of love, what do? You trust, you surrender, you relax. And right there, in that gesture, all the benefits take place. Complete, when we started this conversation an hour ago, this is where all the benefits come from. trusting the goodness of the dark. And which means what? Trusting the goodness of your own being, your own mind and heart. Being willing to drop into yourself so deeply, knowing that at the core of your being is this fundamental matrix of divinity, purity, and love. And this is what's revealed. So the holding environment, literally mandala, in Buddhist languaging, mandala literally means essence container. When you're in the dark, there's this wonderful, you can see I just can't stop talking. There's this amazing line from Tralek Rinpoche where he says, the essence of samsara is we lose the essence in the display. There's too much display. We get lost in the light. We get pulled out. We get distracted. There's too much display. When you go into the dark, like hand over heart practice, the display is reduced to near ground zero. Just what happens when we sleep and what happens when we die. And when the display is reduced to near ground zero, you can recapture, recognize the essence of who you really are. And then what do? The perfect place to end. Then you come back, like we did when we took our masks off. You come back into the light. You come back into speech, into form, into action. But you have the memory of this darkness, this depth, this interiority with you. And so therefore, every speech, every word comes from this depth. Every gesture comes from this depth. Every action comes from this depth. And therefore, this is where you bring in post-retreat authenticity and, dare I say, love into everything you do.
Andrew Holecek, we're talking about Dark Retreat and his new book, Total Eclipse of the Mind, Unleashing the Power of Darkness for Creativity, Healing, and Transformation. Andrew, I had so much fun with you. Thank you so much. I loved meeting you in the dark. Thank you.
It's a delight. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's always so much fun to talk to you. Have the best time possible when you enter your own retreat.
Okay, I will remember this.
Cool.
Thanks, friends.